Ladies and gentlemen, the picture you are about to see was actually filmed near the Chinese Communist border.
This is the story of a small village on the eastern shore of China, and that part of the world we refer to as behind the bamboo curtain. For the protection of its citizens, young and old, the name of the village must remain unknown. And the name of the man in our story, whom we shall call Peter Zhang, must also be kept secret because this story really happened. On the surface, the village looks as happy and peaceful as any other. But few things in Red China are what they appear to be. A village that laughs in its streets may hide death in its alleys. A man who looks like a friend may be an enemy. To some people, Peter Zhang is an enemy. To others, a friend. As a Christian, he is considered an enemy of the communist state. As a pastor, he is the friend and beloved leader of the group of Chinese Christians who meet secretly to pray and read their Bible. To John Wong, the young man beside him, Peter is the bravest, holiest man he has ever known. It began one morning as Peter read the words of Jesus about suffering for one's faith. Fear not. Whosoever shall confess me before men, him will I confess before my Father, which is in heaven. So do not fear them which kill the body, but are not able to kill the soul. Suddenly, the communist officer in charge informed the people they had received their last warning. This man is under arrest. The rest of you will go immediately to your houses and never meet here again. John Wong and the little group of Christians were left alone, wondering what would become of their pastor and themselves, a humble and faithful people whose only crime was believing in the Lord. Military judge repeated the communist demands, but with a new twist. There is an easy way out of all of this, if you would only stop that foolish preaching. But Peter refused to take the easy way. Stop preaching or suffer the consequences. I will preach as long as I have breath in my body. Take him away. Wait, we'll teach him to obey. Hang him by his thumbs. It was not the first time in Christian history to suffer for his faith. Hanging by the thumbs is much like crucifixion. It is a form of torture which brings death by infinitely slow degrees. Within 1 hour, the victim, balancing on the tips of his toes, is no longer able to sustain his weight. The body sags down, pulling the hands and arms from their sockets. After the first hour, every movement wrenches from the sufferer some new agony. Now, will you stop preaching your foolish religion? No. From that time, each second that passed seemed to Peter an eternity. Each minute, the pain increased in the torn joints, muscles. Hours stretched into days, and Peter John remained suspended between life and death in a pain-filled world. Hungry, thirsty, finally too weak to cry out, to speak, unable even to pray. His hands already dead and feeling nothing. It was only a matter of hours until death would mercifully end his suffering. The prison records show that he had defied their tortures for more than 3 days, and the communists decided they had waited long enough. We have been too patient with this man. This time he cooperates, or else. Now for the last time, will you stop preaching? Will you give up this religion? The pain-racked sobs that were torn from Peter's lips were taken as a confession of guilt and a willingness to obey their wishes in the future. Pain flashed through Peter's body as his arms dropped heavily to his sides. The soldiers clumsily dragged him from the cell by his bruised shoulders and mercilessly threw him to the ground, leaving him to die. His persecutors thought the incident of Peter John was closed, that they had broken not only his body, but his indomitable spirit. But they forgot to reckon with the loyalty of the devoted John Wong. The ever-faithful Wong took Peter to his own house, and in spite of the threat of the communist police, the little group of Christians tenderly nursed him, watching and praying for his recovery. When he regained consciousness and saw where he was, Peter tried to sit up. "You shouldn't have brought me here. They will come." John quietly reminded the pastor that God would protect them, as he himself had often said. Peter then told them how his persecutors had tried to make him renounce Christ, to give up preaching, to say that there was no God. Then he added, "But you are risking your lives for me. I cannot allow you to do this." John spoke for all of them. "We cannot forsake you, Pastor. It would be like the disciples of Jesus who left him in the Garden of Gethsemane." Peter pleaded with them to leave him, but they refused. Finally, he suggested another plan. If they would not forsake him, for their own safety, he must leave them. They knew that their pastor spoke the truth and said nothing, as one of their number was sent out to secure a boat in order that he might leave that same night. The others respectfully bowed to their pastor's decision, though the hearts were crushed by the loss. Then Peter prayed. He prayed for their protection in the dark days to come, and committed the little flock to the care of that great shepherd, who laid down his life for his sheep. And the heartbroken young man beside him prayed that he might have courage enough to take Peter's place in the great task that was being left to him. Very early the next morning, before sunrise, two figures slowly made their way toward a small boat waiting offshore. With painful difficulty, Peter was helped aboard. And a heavy-hearted John Wong returned to land to look back upon the face of his friend for the last time. At sunrise on the following morning, the boat carrying Peter Jong sailed into the waters of the Free World Harbor of Hong Kong. Peter caught sight of the skyline of the city outlined against the hills. Hong Kong, the free world, a world that had never been more than 20 miles away from the scenes of suffering and sacrifice Peter had just witnessed. How different it all seemed. How beautiful. How unbelievably beautiful. Suddenly from far off, echoing from the hillsides around the city, came a strangely familiar sound. Music, singing, at 6 o'clock in the morning. Then, after a moment of reflection, Peter understood. It was a familiar hymn, an Easter hymn. It was Easter morning in the free world. Peter could tell from the singing how beautiful it must be. How wonderful to be able to go to church freely, to sing out loud, at the top of your voice, to shout your faith and joy from the housetops, to openly and freely declare your belief in the resurrection, to worship God without fear. But that's the way it is at Easter in the free world. Then Peter found his thoughts racing back to the other side of that narrow strip of water that now seemed to stretch away behind him, an infinite distance toward another world. And he remembered his own experience back in Red China. He remembered the patient suffering of his little congregation. And he knew that Easter in communist China would be no different than any other day. He knew also that his persecution and theirs was only a small part of the sufferings inflicted daily by the rulers of the communist state. That, like him, thousands of his fellow Christians paid dearly for the privilege of believing in Christ and the resurrection. And now, with no one to lead them, their faith is only a small flickering flame in an all-consuming darkness. That is Easter in communist China. Peter realized now how much he was needed back there behind the bamboo curtain. That world shut in where millions are perishing. Who will give them the gospel? There was only one decision for a man like Peter Zhang to make, and he made it. He would return to Red China. Not to the same village, perhaps, but somewhere back there where he was so desperately needed. And he knew that God would show him where it was. Peter Zhang turned his back on freedom and set his face toward his future mission, his aching body erect, standing tall in his faith, the pain in his body forgotten, overwhelmed by the triumph of the resurrection message in his heart. Because I live, ye shall live also.